Welcome, everyone, again to another episode of Who Needs Shoes? And I am your host, Tanya Manning-Yarde. And today we have a fantastic guest that I cannot wait to introduce to you. Our guest today has spent 25 years inside the American education system, not just as a witness, but as an architect. Dr. Mary Rice-Boothe began her career in the classrooms of East Harlem, eventually becoming principal at a transfer school, a final safety net for students the traditional system has often given up on. She went on to scale that leadership nationally to coach hundreds of principals and equity officers through the sharp, often political friction of school reform. It was through that work, supporting leaders in some of the country's largest districts, that she began to document the price of change. She has authored two influential guides for the field: Leading Within Systems of Inequity in Education, which explores the internal liberation of the leader, and her latest, Navigating Power, Harnessing Possibility, a roadmap for steering schools through times of deep uncertainty. But her most recent pivot is perhaps her most personal. She is the founder of Leading Within and the Think 360 Academy, a micro school designed specifically for neurodivergent learners. Today, we're talking about the cost of leadership, the shift from giant systems to intimate micro schools, and what happens when a career long expert on equity has to navigate those same systems as a mother. Dr. Mary Rice-Boothe, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Manning-Yarde. So great to be here. And thank you for that introduction. I was like, oh, who's that? Talking about.
Work hard on it because your experiences and career are so expansive that I was thinking, okay, how can I do Mary justice? So thank you, because I worked hard.
Thank you.
Because you're just that phenomenal. So I want to start our conversation with taking you all the way back in time to when you were a student. And when you look back at yourself as a student, where did the system give you space to excel? And where did you have to fight for it? Was there a specific moment you realized that even becoming a teacher was a way that you'd be able then to change that for others?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I feel like as a student, I was always compliant for the most part, right? So, I love learning. And I loved acquiring new information. And so that kind of deep love of learning kind of helped accelerate me through school. But I think also through school, I also had experience of that it was pushed because I always felt like I need to prove something. Right, and I had to do things despite what my teacher's expectations were of me, starting in kindergarten when my, kindergarten teacher put all the brown kids in the C reading group. This was the '80s, so they didn't really kinda mask it at all. So it was very clear what the A, B, and C represented.
Hmm, hmm.
And so, without any testing, mind you. And so, from there and having to prove to her, like, actually, I don't belong here because I already know how to read. And so I need to be in the A reading group. So from the kindergarten all the way up to my college, my high school college guidance counselor telling me what my backup school was because he didn't believe I was going to get into the schools I applied to. I think that expansion of school, always having to prove myself, is definitely a kind of a demonstration of my education experience and why I went to education myself.
Hmm.
Recognize the fact that I didn't have any any educators that looked like me when I grew up. And I also didn't have any educators that really believed in me. And so I wanted to be able to give that to others that look like me. And I felt like it was really important to be able to I felt like that was probably I did well, right? Because I wanted to do well, right? But imagine if I actually wanted to do well and had the backing of my teachers and the adults around me at the same time. And so I think that's that's the initial catalyst for me to go into education, and I think the, continued catalyst is how to make sure that I'm breaking this cycle of low expectations, as I got older and saw this is the same experience my mother had,
Mhm.
and, it's the same experience that my kids are currently having. How do I break that cycle? I don't know if that answers your question, but that is the my, education experience, a catalyst of why I'm here and what why I do the work that I do.
Mm. I want to move now to where we met, and that's when you were a principal at Harlem Renaissance. And being the principal, I know, and being a principal of a transfer school model. Can you talk a little bit about what the transfer school model is? What attracted that particular model compared to a traditional school? Why did that attract you to be a leadership of that type of school?
Yeah.
And why did you feel like a transfer school model was more in alignment with your purpose as a leader?
Yeah. So transfer schools are the definition are students who are overage and undercredited. So are students who have fallen behind in their track towards graduation, and it's kind of like their last chance before having to get their GED. So in New York City, you have until 21 to gain your high school diploma before you are kind of age out of the system. So the students that were at Harlem Renaissance were primarily students who were at least a semester behind in their credit accumulation. We're helping them kind of fast track their credit accumulation and their Regents exam pass rate so that they could graduate and get a traditional high school diploma before pursuing career in college. And the reason why I was attracted to that particular model was because as a high school English teacher, excuse me, I don't know if I asked for them or they were bestowed on me, but I basically created a little transfer classroom, and so they were called 9.5 grade, is what called them, and they were students that were a half a semester behind, and were needed some type of dedicated support in order to move them up to get them aligned and back on track in regards to track to graduation. And in that classroom, I had students that were mostly students that were in special education designated, and then also just needed a different way of learning, right? And so
Mhm.
it wasn't as if they weren't intelligent kids. It wasn't if they didn't know what was happening. They just weren't interested in school, and so it just allowed like it was a very different playground, that classroom that I was able to do, and definitely collaborated. Like this, number one, we created a community, like we are all in this together and we all need to move to the next level, and you need to help your brother and sister to get there with you, right? So we created this really strong bond, and then we also were able to create this space of um play different type of learning, right? And so we were not, we were not sitting, they were not sitting and listening to me talk, right? We were always bringing in. It's funny, I was in the car with my husband last week, and there was a song on the radio, and I'm like, oh my god, this is how I taught my kids metaphors and similes. Like we, right? Like we just, like I use, hip hop, rap, like constantly through my, how to get them to learn their parts of speech and kind of how we, so I pulled everything from their experience into that classroom to help them move to the next level, and that type of fulfillment, just like and being able to pour into students, not just academically, but socially and emotionally as well, I just really enjoyed. And so when I went through the process of becoming a principal, that it just really attracted me to be able to do that at a full school level, which pushed me into the transfer school space.
Mhm. One of the things that I really admired when I would come to your school is seeing also your portfolio approach to when students were graduating. Can you talk a little bit about why you value that as a culminating or capstone to demonstrate students learning? And then I have a kind of a part two of that question around all the phenomenal things that I know you were doing with students that I saw, and I know even behind the scenes, you know, as the visionary and the primary point person, what was that like in trying to create that type of atmosphere, sustain that atmosphere, and all the interest holders that were involved, from the staff and administrators to district leadership, the students, the families, the community? And how did you go about still succeeding in doing that, even in the midst of all these moving parts? So I know I asked you two questions, so I'll tackle the first one around the portfolio-based approach, and then the systemic approach to help that, come to fruition, and what were some of the challenges you faced in sustaining that model and approach?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with the portfolio approach, I think I benefited in understanding and learning that model from different ways. Number one, as a student. So, as a high school student, we did not portfolios in that respect, but we definitely had to kind of, as a senior capstone experience I had as a high school student, was kind of sharing my learning over time. And so I recognized that the importance and the value of kind of doing that type of work and reflection as a learner. And so, and then as a teacher, I went to and I taught at East Harlem, East Central Park East, which was a a premier portfolio based school started by Deborah Meyer at that time. And so that kind of process and that type of learning as a teacher also showed me like, oh, it shows again how a student has learned over time, and gives them the opportunity to kind of talk about their process. And this tells me so much more about what they learned than if I just gave them a test, right? And so I just, again, I value that and recognize the fact that particularly for students who have overcome so much in a transfer school experience, and being able to kind of get to this finish line, a lot of times it's taking them longer than 4 years to get there, and they've had to overcome a lot of other additional responsibilities that are on their shoulders. And that being able to take a step back and be able to talk about their high school experience holistically is so much more powerful than saying I just passed a regents exam. And so I think that kind of also, it not only gave that student the opportunity to be reflective, but also gave the leaders in the room an opportunity, and the teachers in the rooms the opportunity to see and hear, okay, so how did I do as their support to the student? Where did I show up for them? And then
Mhm.
where's the opportunity for me to show up and being more present for the next student that's in front of me. So I think it's a reciprocal learning experience as well. And so that is something that I deeply believe in the portfolio based model, and knowing that New York City now has that option to kind of do something different. And going back to that is really exciting to see that has come back.
As you were talking earlier about from the student's lens, take me to a moment where you saw a student realize that they were being measured by the actual weight of their thoughts rather than a test score. In that moment, how did it feel for you as using the portfolio model as a way of returning the voice to the students in a system that had taken it from them?
It's a deep question. Um, I mean, I'm thinking about those different portfolio presentations that I was able to be in, and just to not only see. I think there was a couple different kind of stages of how I kind of saw that impact. And then number one, the time and attention that our students took into putting their portfolios together. Right. And so our student, you would think that as a senior, you've done this, you like theoretically also, because of New York City, they didn't have to do portfolio presentations, right? Like I couldn't technically not graduate them because they didn't do
Mhm.
their portfolio, right? They passed all their regions. But to see students that said, I want to do this,
Mm.
I want to show my progress over time. And then to take the time and care to put together, a presentation, and to be able to proudly share that in front of their peers and kind of share their journeys. I think that kind of being in the space and hearing those was always one of the favorite parts of the year for me, was being able to hear that. And I think it's um sometimes it's so hard to kind of see the fruits of your labor, right? Sometimes you see it more, you see it more if, a lot of times I feel like you see it more as a teacher, but as an administrator, it's like super hard to see.
Mhm,
And to be able to be in that space and to hear them talk about not just what they learned, but like who was there and what kind of mechanisms and processes and experiences help them get there, also was just it's a great motivator, right? And it's kind of also like incredibly affirming,
mhm.
to be able to hear that from students.
Gonna take me now to having been a principal and now working in systems that support principals, namely in terms of your work with new leaders and the Leadership Academy. Um, I want you to kind of talk with the audience about certain common threads you may be seeing now in a leadership level. So you've spent nearly a decade at New Leaders and the Leadership Academy and moving from the kind of daily firefighting of a principal's office to a seat where you're now designing national strategy for entire districts. And now that you are one of those coaching principals, I'm sorry, now that you are one of the coaching principals and equity officers who's in kind of like the thick of it, what are some of the common threads you now see across the country?
When I initially went from the principal seat into working in a nonprofit, and I intentionally joined New Leaders because they were a national organization, right? And I wanted to see like I want to be and understand school beyond New York City. Or New York City had definitely had been my bubble, and it was a big bubble.
Mhm,
It was an experience, but I felt like things that must be doing differently outside of New York City. And I think the one thing that burst my bubble is recognize the fact that like school isn't much different no matter where you
mhm,
go, right? Right? Like there's just some things that are just the same. If you're in Nevada, if you're in Minnesota versus Texas, like it literally is the same. And I think that was actually incredibly disappointing to me.
mhm.
Because
Speak on that. Why is that?
I felt like how can a student experiencing school in rural Nevada have the exact same approach to teaching and learning that a student that's sitting in the classroom in Harlem. Like I just
Mhm,
like it just didn't make any sense to me that their the approach to teaching and learning was exactly the same. Like I felt like
mhm,
there was no attention due to context, due to their experience, due to who they were, even and when it was very clear that they were having very different experiences in their life based on where they were. And
mhm,
so I think and it's always interesting yet frustrating to me when I'm talking to a district leader or a school leader and they're asking me, well, what worked? Tell me about what other people are doing or what you've seen in other places. I'm like, I can tell you that, but but I will let you know that that is not going to work where you are. Right? I
mhm,
cannot cut and paste what happened in this city and put it in your city. Like it's just not going to work. If you're not going to contextualize this approach and and make sure that it really is aligned to who your students are and who your community is, I will
mhm,
guarantee you failure. And so I think that is something that I've had to it was eye-opening to me, and I think it's something that I'm always constantly trying to navigate with leaders is, like, we are constantly looking for this silver bullet, like and we just have to
mhm,
stop, like, stop looking for a silver bullet, it's not there, and
mhm,
it's not gonna work, and so, like, how do we ensure that we're always we know what good teaching and learning looks like. Like we know that. So how do you ensure that you're actually pulling up what good teaching and learning looks like and actually putting it in, and molding it based on who's in front of you? And I think that kind of that second step is sometimes is difficult for a leader to do because it requires not only a level of understanding and appreciation, but it also
mhm,
requires a level of political navigation that I think a lot of times educators feel like they shouldn't have to do or don't want to do, right? They just want to like, I just want to teach. I just want to like, I'm here to be an educator. And I think a lot of times us leaders in particular have to understand that your job is number one is teaching and learning, but it's teaching and learning within an institution and a society that requires you to be political and approach in a political space. And if you can't do that, and you're constantly chasing a silver bullet of a package of approach, you're going to constantly fail. And I mean, that's why we're seeing our kids. That's why Johnny can't read now, because you keep doing the same thing over and over again and just looking for what worked in another state, and trying to put it into yours.
Mm. Well, Mary, let me ask you that with everything that you've seen and experienced now, what advice would you give to yourself that first year when you were a principal? What would you have given yourself as advice back then?
Woo! So much advice. It's interesting. I have a couple of friends who have kind of circled back, right? Like we were principals, we were, principals in their 20s, early 30s, left, and then have now come back into the principalship, 20, 30 years later. I find it incredibly fascinating because I do think that I think like I would be such a good principal right now because I feel like at the age that I started being a principal, I felt like I had to prove myself, right? And I had to prove that like I was capable of doing this thing of principling. I think I did too much of it. I tried to do too much of it on my own. And I tried to do too much convincing, and too much trying to like and posturing, that I felt like what that now I recognize is like wasted energy, right? And so I think what I have learned now more than ever is like the value of community and the value of having multiple people being in your on your bus with you, and being able to share that. And I think I got there a little bit towards the end of my tenure and kind of having and trying to bring other folks on board. But I think that that wasting of trying to establish myself and prove myself, um was I feel like was wasted energy. And I think that even yes, I feel like I I can bring a lot of expertise into the space, but being the smartest person in the room is not as cracked up, right? Right, feeling like you need to be the smartest person in the room, thinking you're the smartest person in the room, like all of
Hmm.
that like doesn't help at all, in what you're trying and like what the end goal is, which is the end goal is ensuring that our students are successful. So I think that was definitely some learning, is that I needed to be able to the people that reached out to me that first year, where I felt like I was so busy and bogged down that I couldn't return their phone call. I wish I would have taken the time to return their phone call.
Mm. And thinking about lessons learned and your experiences, I want to now jump forward a little bit to 2023 when you had founded Leading Within LLC. Was there a specific moment where you realized that to truly help leaders, you had to build your own structure outside of the institution?
Yeah. I mean, I think the writing of my first book, was like a this like multi-level experience, right? So it's the experience of being able to, it was during COVID, so like being able to like talk to people was exciting, right? And like having, doing so, did over 30 interviews, of talking to different leaders of color, and kind of like constantly hearing their approaches, but also hearing like they're under kind of current of like, I'm tired, um and I'm doing as best as I can, but I just don't know if I can actually doing anything. I'm
Hmm.
actually making any type of inroads in this space. And so kind of doing that and kind of hearing people's perspectives, and then also having my own experience of being a leader within an organization and seeing and trying to make moves within that organization, and being proud of the changes that have been accomplished, but also recognizing like it's so incremental,
Hmm.
right? And like, is it actually doing something, right? And it's like, I think hearing from so many other leaders about kind of having um this incremental change, feeling it myself, and then understanding kind of in I think it was my first year of getting my doctor. We read about having this tempered radicals, and this approach of kind of like folks that are inside the system that
Hmm.
are trying to make change and make moves. And I felt like I've been this tempered radical for literally decades now. And it's not getting me where I feel like I want to go or feeling like where I have impact. And so I felt like there was a need to do something differently and not feeling like I was bound by an organization, and wanted to see like, okay, so what does it mean to be the person that is outside the organization, outside the pillar, and being able to kind of push from that and see kind of like how do I continue to sharpen as well as and sharpen and strengthen my voice if I didn't have any constraints around it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of really where I am right now, to be able to say, you know what, nobody can tell me I can't say anything. So I'm not gonna say it. So between that and the fact of getting older, I was like, watch out because I'm saying whatever I want to say and
Hmm.
nobody can tell me nothing. You know, that's where I am.
And can you talk a little bit about the work that you do with Leading Within and what your goals are along with with creating this organization?
Yeah. I mean, I think the my kind of journey into education has continued to evolve, right? And so going from teacher to principal to to district support and then into this nonprofit space, I think I realized that um there's particular things that I know that I have a gift for, right? And it's within my realm of genius. And so how do I kind of take those things and help to narrow them? And so within Leading Within, there are kind of three kind of big buckets that I try to support folks in, and one is through writing and research, and so having the opportunity to be able to gather perspectives and learnings from leaders and then be able to kind of pull that together and share out through research papers, through writing, through chapters. It's been really exciting to me, and so I just kind of finished up doing a series around supporting principles of color and what systems need to do. And then I'm about to kind of go into the space of doing some research around Black women in leadership and kind of what is their approaches in particular, that they are doing in order to support teaching and learning and improving student outcomes. So that's one bucket of work. The other bucket is around training, training and coaching, which is kind of what I'm known for. And right,
Hmm. Yes, it is.
can feel like I can, stand in front of a room of 5 people or stand in a room of 500 people, and being able to kind of bring people together, and through a given topic. And that training, I prefer it to be around kind of supporting teachers and leaders of color, but also has been around, just teaching and learning in general. Um,
Hmm.
I could probably facilitate something around anything,
Hmm.
and the kind of
Hmm.
support.
I've
Um,
seen you in action. That is true.
yeah, it's supporting adult learning. And then the third bucket is around kind of thinking about resource development, right? And kind of thinking that there's um, uh, you know resources that going back to the a lot of times teachers and leaders appreciate that silver bullet, but I'm not giving you the bullet, but I can give you a resource that you can use, and put in front of your other leaders, and think through yourself. And so that's the kind of the third buckets. Those are kind of the main areas. So we're Leading Within supports, and I've had the opportunity to really connect with a lot of different organizations, and approaching that work through various ways. So it's exciting.
Mm, awesome. I want to now switch a little bit from talking with your educator lens to now your parental lens. So, as an educator, you're trained to spot patterns in children. So, take me back to the moment you began to notice patterns within your own children when you first suspected that their paths would be different. How did you handle that tension between your professional brain and your feelings as a mother?
Yeah. That was really hard, to be honest, right? Going back to I was a lover of school, right? And even though um it wasn't necessarily a place where I felt like I belonged or felt like I had support, I had a kind of an internal love, internal motivation towards excelling that kind of allowed me to push constraints or low expectations kind of out of my way.
Mhm.
And I had kids that were not like that at all. Number one, I had kids that were much more emotionally connected. um,
Mhm.
and so, I think sometimes that us kids of the 80s and 90s are a little bit Gen X. I just, we're not super fuzzy and fuzzy,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
that wasn't really supported in our households growing up. So, therefore I wasn't, like I wasn't a fuzzy person. I remember being a principal, like, the thing that I couldn't stand the most was having somebody come into my office and start crying. I'm just no, like I don't do emotion. I don't do emotion. And then I had kids that were all emotion,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
right? I was like, what is happening? So
Mhm.
between that and then having kids that just also like just didn't have a love of school either, right? And so like those two things just like I'm like it was foreign to me how to navigate kids that were so different from me in that way, in particular in relationship to school. And I think thankfully though what I was able to cultivate in my daughter, who's the oldest, is that the ability to be incredibly self-aware,
Mhm.
and the ability to self-advocate. And so I think what those qualities were able to lead to the fact that like she's the one that came to me and was just like, look, I learned differently than the other kids in my class. And I don't think it's just a different thing. I want to be tested. And I think as a Gen Z kid who is always on YouTube and all, so
Mhm.
I think I have autism and I want to be tested to confirm that I do. And so, I think it was through, so we went through the testing process for her, and she was diagnosed, and after she was diagnosed, she's like, you need to get my brother tested. And so I think that that process of being able to at least have a child that had the ability to be incredibly self-aware, is what kind of brought to the space. And I think it also, some people think of like, how did you feel about having your, did you feel, feel a certain way to be having, especially as an educator, to have two kids with autism? Like, did it like, have a negative, did you have a negative reaction to it? And I said, I didn't have a negative reaction at all. For me, it was affirming. Like, it was like,
Mm.
oh, okay. Like
Mhm.
now I have a better understanding of where my kids are coming from. And I now have the tools and the backing to be a better advocate and a better parent to them, because I understand more where they're coming from. And just having them being kind of like emotional creatures who kind of didn't like school was hard for me to put my head around. But
Mhm.
understanding that this came from a clear diagnosis made it much clearer to me. So I never felt like anything negative by their that diagnosis. Only just kind of like now we have a clear path to moving forward.
Mm. Can I ask you, because I know sometimes parents, when they get the diagnosis, for some it can be challenging around, um, well, now what does this mean for my child in school? Will they be successful? Can I ask you, like, how did you perceive what success should be for your kids, that then once you receive both of their diagnoses, that you perhaps maybe shifted that definition and constitution of what should be success for them?
Yeah. I mean, I think my expectations did not change, to
Mhm.
be honest. And I think the reason why my expectations didn't change is because I was a principal of a transfer school, right? So like
Mhm.
I had seen students who were challenged with school be successful and find their way. So for me, by having a diagnosis and understand, I'm like, okay, so the expectations are still the same, but now I know that the journey is going to look different. So we just need to figure out what the journey is going to be. And so, because I know there is one, we just got to find it.
Mhm.
So I think that was kind of my my take on it, because I felt like there was the diagnosis didn't change their ability to be successful. It just only changes their journey to get there. And
Mm.
that's why I still feel that way.
Hmm. And in speaking about their journey, I want to move to your current work in terms of creating a micro school. Um, because as you had noted earlier, you spent your career reforming giant school systems, and micro school is a very intimate, almost radical departure from large scale education. What would you say was the specific missing piece in traditional systems that convinced you that for your son and children like him, that they needed a space that was more focused and personalized in order to truly thrive?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I literally stumbled up on this micro school concept and idea. And I stumbled on it because a good friend of mine, I've been talking to her over the past several years about kind of my son's experience in school, and kind of how frustrating it had been, and how kind of we've looked at, different schools in our area. They're mostly private and crazy expensive,
Mhm.
in the area. And then we talked to I've talked to the district, and we've done feel like we've kind of exhausted all measures. They're trying to figure out like what's possible. And she's like, well, have you thought about looked at micro schools? I'm like, what's that? And so she was able to connect me with somebody who was in that space, and I
Mhm.
kind of gone went deep dive into what micro schools are, what they're about, what that movement is around. And I think what interests me most and what connected me most about it is, number one, it connected me back to my 9.5 classroom, right?
Mm.
And that kind of like those group of students that I had, for multiple periods a day, and kind of like how I was able to create this space within this one classroom, with a clear focus, and supporting them from many different angles based on kind of what their needs are and what their interests were. I was like, okay, so I'm like, I know like I can do that because I've
Mhm.
done it before, right? So that kind of spurred me. And then I also recognized the fact that like, and also like historically, like Black folks, we've been doing this forever, right? Like
Mhm.
from the slave quarters to the church basements to to the community centers to the living rooms. Like we've always been kind of like creating spaces of learning
Mhm.
that were just for us because
Yes.
the larger system couldn't do it, wouldn't do it, right? And so I felt like I have not only historical perspective and how this can look and be done, but I have personal experience about what this could look like and can be done. And so I think bringing those two things together is just like I shouldn't have to see my kid struggle day after day after day, like, when I have the ability to give him something different. And so, that's kind of what led me into this space, and I'm still kind of figuring it out, to be honest, and just saying, like, how can this be possible? But I think it's, and, I'm, currently taking a step back and going a different pathway, but I still feel like it's incredibly important work, and I think it's, something that, we're gonna get there, even though it's taking us longer than we wanted it to.
Mhm. Can you share for parents who may be interested in initiating a micro school approach with their children as well? Like, what does it take to do that in terms of creating a micro school? What is a day in the life of a child in a micro school like? Kind of giving them a snapshot of the ways in which they too can be empowered with creating a micro school and how to go about executing it. And then what is a day in the life of a student like at a micro school, particularly
Yeah.
say for a neurodivergent child?
Yeah, yeah. And I think the beauty of micro schools and kind of how the day looks like is like it literally can look anything that you want it to look like, right? So it's like I think that's the beauty of it. It's like so if I have a child that needs to have needs to have a long transition into the school day before they kind of start maybe a traditional classroom, like I can provide that space, right? And kind of give that long entry. If it need more time between transitions, I can do that. If I need lots of different options for seating and kind of how they are interact within the classroom, that I can create that kind of type of environment, that I can use the outdoors as part of learning, and I can use field trips and kind of exploration into different spaces as part of the learning, right? So like you have, as a micro school, you have this kind of like that basically the world is your oyster, right? Like in regards to like how you approach it, and how you approach teaching and learning, right? Like, yes, there's lots of different like online programs that you can pull into, and have students interact with. But like, you know, I have my son right now. It's just like, if I have to be on the computer anymore to learn, I'm going to explode. And this kid loves his computer, but like
Hmm.
the idea of like having to like do another online program to learn, he's just like, give me a worksheet. So being able to like understand how this child learns and create an individual path for them is something that I think, particularly around micro schools and particularly around students who are neurodivergent, I think is incredibly helpful. So I actually having an IEP that is comprehensive, number
Hmm.
one, and that actually leads a child through their learning, and that is kind of very clearly updated and tracked along time in partnership with families, is something that's integral to Think 360 Academy. But I think it's also, you know, I've seen across kind of talking to other micro school founders, it's something that's fundamental across the models in really personalizing education, number one, and then number two, doing the work in partnership with families. And I think that's also something that during COVID, our districts, our traditional school districts had to partner with families, right?
Hmm.
Because they couldn't be there. And I think when we got back, all of a sudden the doors closed back again, right? And teachers like, okay, thanks, right? And
Hmm.
kind of like left the parents outside again. And I think that was actually an incredible loss, and the fact that we kind of disassociated again. And so I think again, that's something that micro schools does, is they bring families into their child's learning experience. And I think particularly, I know for my son, and I think for like other kids who are autistic or neurodivergent, like that connection to a parent is really, really important for them. And to see kind of that separation, because the school door separates them, is really hard to do. And so I think again, micro school allows that that connection to remain in place, and help them kind of be able to learn. And then also it gives a day in the life of a micro school can put space and balance their social and emotional learning with their academic progress as well. And so you don't have, we have to pass the STAR exam or the state exam impending on our shoulders. Like that's not there, right? Because you don't have to do, you're not required to do, it's not every state, but a lot of states you're required to do those state exams, so you don't have um,
Pressure.
that pressure, to be able to do that. So I think that for all those reasons, schools are a good option. I mean, to launch one is super scary. It is, you are an entrepreneur. You're launching a small business, right? And so you have to be very much have a business mindset to be
Hmm.
able to do it and understand kind of what your budget is, how to manage profit and loss, how to build connections and get sponsors and funding and all of that. How to get a space, you know, how to create a tuition, you know, in base that will help you be financially viable. So all those pieces are hard, especially if you're coming into it from a parent or educator mindset. So recognizing the
Hmm.
fact that you have to kind of hold those things, and as you're launching that like business part of you, it needs to be first and foremost.
Hmm.
So that's a challenge.
When you think about the imprint your children will leave on the world, what do you hope they create that has nothing to do with the diagnosis and everything to do with the environment that you and your family is building around?
Yeah. I mean, I think when I look at my daughter who's 20, just turned 20, can you believe that?
I cannot.
That's crazy to me. I know when you first met her, she was like crawling.
We got to
Um,
just pause the interview right now because Sometimes when I see her pictures on online, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this grown woman is just" okay, go ahead. Time is flying. Time
Yeah,
is flying.
it is incredibly fun. I'm not getting older, so I don't know
You're
how
just
this
getting better with time. Exactly.
I don't know how this is happening for her. Um, but I think I don't know if it's nature or nurture. I would hope it's kind of both. That she is an incredibly socially conscious, socially aware human being who um very much clearly kind of lets me know that my generation and generation before us has messed up the world, and has left
Mm,
it to clean it, left her generation and her brother's generation there to clean it up, and she's
good.
not happy about it.
Mhm,
Um, but is she would do as much as she can to kind of to clean up the mess that we've created. So thrifting our clothes so we can save water and save the environment. We need to
mhm,
be you know we should we're not using any paper products within our household. We using everything, um glassware, and kind of like being able to kind of doing all these different kind of very practical everyday shifts in how we are living day to day because of her awareness. I feel like I couldn't ask for anything more, right? In regards to kind of like how she approaches how she lives, and it has very clearly had an impact on our family and kind of how we approach and how we live. I can't remember the last time I bought anything brand new.
mhm.
Everything is thrifted in our house. Which I'm not mad about.
Mhm, mhm,
Saves me financially. And so I think that um, that is what I would want to do, right? So she has seen the fact that for me, I have very much a racial lens through things. So like I'm very clear about like who I buy from and how am I supporting, Black and minority owned businesses through everything that I do, right? And so for her to be able to see how I approach things, and she has taken her particular lens and now approaches it through does her living through that lens. I think that is what I would want. And I hopefully, when my son, as he is, he's 11 right now. So he's like starting to kind of like engage and recognize kind of the things around him and how he is seen or perceived as a young Black boy. And kind of like,
mhm.
so now what's good? What is it that I'm aware of? And how do I ensure that how I live is an example of how I want others to live?
I'm gonna move now to how prolific you are as a writer in terms of writing books and articles, and how do you do that? So, writing 2 books is a really deeply internal process. So, how did you find the quiet to hear your own voice while navigating the high decibel demands of being a mother, a wife, an educator, and an advocate?
That was not easy. They talk about sophomore, your second book, album, whatever it may be, creative expression, and how much harder it is in the first. And I can attest to it that it was so
Mhm,
much harder the second time around
mhm,
than it was the first time around. And I missed my deadline many, many times.
mhm,
Um, I think for the first book, I had a much better rhythm, having a set time. I wrote at night, and kind of having a set time to write, and kind of having giving designated days and vacation to kind of do that, and kind of got into
mhm,
the regimen of that. I think with the second one, it was much harder to do,
mm,
which is why I missed my deadline. But I think something that I recognize about my approach to write is number one is I have to process and be in my head for a long time before I can put anything into paper.
mm,
So I have to give myself the space and place to do that in order that I can, when I sit down to write, I'm actually writing and actually kind of putting pen to paper. And so number one, I'm a runner, so I run almost every day, and I always try to run early in the morning because even though I have usually have something in my ears, it does give me the space to kind of that processing time to think
Mhm.
through what I need to write about, and to kind of get clarity about like what are the words that I'm trying to put together, what are my main ideas, and kind of put that all together.
Mhm.
Sometimes I remember it when I get back from my run. Sometimes I don't. I have stopped many times and try to, write it down or in my notes app or
Mhm.
capture it, audio via audio so I know remember. So I think that's one practice that I do. I think that also the second practice is that I just write every day, right? It's kind of like getting into the space of like putting something to paper kind of helps a lot. And then I have also, I think the third thing that I've done, which I had to learn very humbly through the second book, is the power
Mhm.
of revision. Um,
Mhm.
and that revision is probably even more important than actual writing process, and being okay with kind of going back and completely redoing. And so, literally, the first draft of the second book that I put in is probably maybe 20% of it is actually in the final draft. So I completely
Mhm.
I completely rewrote it after
Mhm.
of writing the first draft for over a year, rewrote the whole thing in,
Mhm.
like, 3 months.
That sounds about
Um
right. It does. Like, that whole process is the product itself. Like, what you put down initially doesn't necessarily stay until the end. It evolves over time as you evolve as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, and I think that is um, you know, um, I think I held on to things in my first book, right? And I think, right, as all writers do, we want to we feel like every word is precious, but then when we get to the final project, we're like, damn it, like I wish I would have said this instead, or I would have drafted this differently. And
Mhm.
so, I think even though the second book is, I would probably say if somebody read it, it's probably less personal potentially
Mhm.
than my first book, but I think it is much more a evidence of revision, and being clear about audience and goal than my first book, and it kind of my writing I think is tighter
Mm.
the second time around. And I'm hoping, the third time will be the charm where I feel
Mhm.
like I got it. I got
I
it.
got and the 5th one will be the masterpiece.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
As an avid runner and also being a runner that has run several marathons, when you are out for a long run, far away from the roles of advocate, wife, or educator, what's the conversation you have with yourself? Is running the only place where you get to let go the responsibility of supporting everyone else?
Yes. Yes, 100%. Yes. It's funny, I was at a all-day retreat yesterday, with a board that I'm on, and all of us are runners, and I was talking to somebody about the fact that, like, yes, there's a very, there's a big running culture and running community and running groups type of a thing out there, and I am a purposely solo runner.
Mhm.
And it is because it is the only time of the day that I am completely by myself. No one is asking me for anything.
Mhm.
There are no expectations on me at all. And I can just be. And so that is, I think, a really important practice for me to have to like be able to process. So again, I'm a processor. I'm an internal processor, right? I'm very much an introvert at my core, and so I need that time by myself to be able to not only process, but also be able to like to generate that energy that I need to have in order to then be around people the rest of the day, right? And
Mhm.
if I don't have that. Even my family is very much aware. It's like, okay, mom hasn't run in a couple days.
You feel some type of way about that, I'm sure. And we begin to kind of catch that blow back. There you go.
Exactly. She's a little grumpy. So yeah, I think it's something that I started late in life. Like, I didn't start running in long distance in earnest until I turned 40. So
Mm.
it's that, it's something very new to me, but it's definitely something that's very much become a part of who I am, part of my identity. I don't know where I would be without it. So
Mm. In my last two questions, I want to ask you about your recent work in terms of like your international lens in the collaboration you've been doing with Ghana, and what drew you to expand your lens to working in Ghana specifically? And as you engage with educators there, what are some of the conversations that you're having with them, and how are those conversations expanding your own thinking about what liberation can look like?
yeah, yeah. Um, I that Working with Ghana and working with Ghana ACD is kind of my happy place. And it was an accidental stumbling upon it. I think after my first book and being able to talk to different people, first of all, I remember talking to somebody about the kind of like the lenses that I used within the book, and one person talked to me about regions. And she's like, have you, you very much talked about kind of like obviously kind of thinking about leaders of color and kind of race and ethnicity, but have you also talked about the impact of place and how that impacts kind of how you lead? And it was something that was kind of like stuck in my head. And so there was a Jill Harrisonberg, who is a fellow writer, and she had published a book a couple years before me. And I had noticed on LinkedIn that she was doing some work in Ghana, and just reached out to her and kind of and it's kind of spiraled from there.
Hmm.
And my first time there, I think I appreciated incredibly the impact of place, and how understanding place and understanding context is so integral to how
Hmm.
we approach leadership, right? And how, in Ghana, it's not about leader, it's about tribalism, right? And kind of like
Hmm.
how does where your tribe is and who your people are impacts how you're seen and perceived, and how do different tribes interact, and what role does gender play in recognizing the fact of how much gender is a part of how people are approached and appreciated within education, and how much hierarchy is a part of leading as well. And so I think all of those I had so many of those aha moments,
Mm.
that really helped me and keeps me kind of going back. Excited about kind of going back for the third year in a row this upcoming July,
Hmm.
um, and understanding that this it's not when I go to Ghana, it's not about me, American, thinking I am better or I have so much more experience and insights to education. It's also about like, you know what, as a Ghanaian educator, you have 40 kids in a classroom. Every student comes in speaking multiple languages, right? Like you have year round school approach, right? And so like all these different things that you have a national curriculum that you're implementing, right? And so you're thinking about like how to appreciate and centralize Ghanaian history in your content, and Ghanaian approaches and ways of learning, and all those things that the U.S. are clearly getting wrong. That
Hmm.
it can be learned and understood by being in community, and learning with Ghanaian educators. And so for me, every time I go to Ghana, I learn more about how to
Hmm.
approach my leadership journey, and I feel like I become a better educator every single time I go there. And that's what is also exciting to me, is about ensuring that like how do I keep getting every time that I'm there. And now I have to make sure like, okay, so what am I giving as well? Right. And so
Mm.
making sure that the reciprocal learning experience is as equal as possible. And so I think also, given where we are politically in this country, um, under being able to zoom out and see what does education mean? What does teaching and learning mean for Black and Brown people from a international perspective? And how are we approaching teaching our kids from international perspectives? Kind of allows me to kind of beat out all the noise, because that's what I think feel like it is just noise,
Mhm.
and really focus in on what's best for our kids. And so if I can't talk to what it means to be a Black principal in the United States, I can talk about what it means to be a leader of the global majority, right? And how do I do this work as a leader of the global majority, right? And so
Mhm.
I think that also gives expanded language and expanded perspective that I think is really necessary right now.
I think what you shared is a perfect segue into our last question around where you are in 2026. So, as you look at the landscape of 2026, what is the cycle in our education system that you are most determined to break in your next chapter?
I mean, I am so many, but I think narrowly, I'm very much focused on supporting Black autistic boys. And obviously that's personal.
Mhm.
And I think, though, if I can get my son continue to love learning, because he loves it at home. It's not that he
Mhm.
doesn't love it, right?
Mhm.
Continue to love learning in a school space and feel like he belongs in that school that he's in, whatever school that he's in. That is a pathway for other Black autistic boys to love and feel like they belong, which would mean other Black boys will love and feel belonged, which would mean other Black kids, boys and girls, right? So I feel like in my current space, I'm kind of going back to where I started, right?
Mhm.
I started in that classroom, so expanded out to school, expanded out nationally, expanded out internationally, right? And then I feel like I'm now coming back
Mhm.
to that singular child
Mhm.
in that singular classroom, to do it all over again, right? And so, that's where I feel like I am, and as I kind of play in this urgent sandbox of
Mhm.
ensuring that my son gets what he needs. I also am able to kind of now take, over, um, 25 years of this experience into that sandbox,
Mm.
and then also be able to kind of like lift out in the same time, right? So like I don't have to stay in the sandbox if I find something incredibly impactful. I now have the platform and the space and place to be like, hey, look what I found, and
Yeah.
be able to share it out on a much more regular basis. And so I feel like for me, that's kind of where I am, is to continue, is I have that space and that freedom to kind of continue to zoom in and out,
Mhm.
and use whatever kind of mechanisms that I have to be able to do that, that constant kind of coming from, balcony to dance floor, um, at the same time.
Mary, as we close out our conversation, are there any final words, things you'd like to share with the audience?
I know words. I mean, I guess I'll say I'll go from this space as a parent. Um, I think that, as parents, we have incredible power and agency to ensure that our kids get what they need, and in their education experience. And even as a, experienced leader who understood the the kind of the mechanisms in order to get there, it was still hard for me to figure it out. And then I also understood, like, I felt bad when I went over my son's principal and went to the district and they're like, look, this isn't working. We need to do something else. But also
Mhm.
recognize the fact, like, but this is my child. Like, so I'm going to do what I need to do in order to ensure that he's getting what he should be getting. And so I think number one I want parents to recognize the fact that like you do have that agency to ensure that your child gets what they need, and that it is. However, recognize the fact that the system is definitely set up for you not to be able to do that, and that it takes a lot of time, effort, and perseverance to push through all of those blockers that are in front of you, to be able to do so. So I just want to share encouragement, and support to parents who feel like it's like they're not getting anywhere, feeling like it's exhausting, and feeling like there's nobody that really cares about their kid. But actually, there are folks there that care. It just sometimes takes a little bit of digging to find them.
Mary, I just want to say thank you as friend, as role model, as guru, that I am so honored that you took time out of your very busy schedule to have this conversation. Where can people find you and how can people contact you for any additional information or questions they may have?
Yep. You will most likely find me social media wise. You most likely find me on LinkedIn, and so that's kind of where I post the most about kind of the work that I'm doing. I post a lot of my writing there, and kind of a lot of my reflections there. So that's kind of the main space. I also have a Substack, which is where I post several times a month about kind of what am I experiencing. As well, I've been doing a lot of kind of previews and sneak previews of my upcoming book that is being published in May. So I think those are probably the two biggest spaces where I'm the most active right now, that folks can connect and follow along.
Mary, again, thank you for joining us here on Who Needs Shoes. For our audience, I just want to say you can find us on Instagram at Who Needs Shoes. You can find us on the web at whoneedsshoes.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And again, Dr. Mary Rice-Boothe, thank you for joining us. And to our audience, thank you again as well for joining us. And until next time, take care and we'll see you again.
Thank you so much.